The neon lights of the Chevron gas station cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt as 73-year-old Eleanor Vasquez carefully counted the wrinkled bills in her worn leather purse. It was 9:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Eleanor was making what had become a weekly ritual, stopping for gas on her way home from her job cleaning offices downtown. At 73, Eleanor should have been enjoying retirement, but life had dealt her a series of cruel blows. Her husband of 45 years had passed away 3 years ago, leaving behind medical bills that had consumed their savings. Her Social Security barely covered her rent and utilities, so she had taken the cleaning job to make ends meet. It wasn't much, but it allowed her to maintain her independence and dignity. Eleanor had raised 5 children as a single mother after her first husband abandoned the family when the kids were young. She had worked multiple jobs, sacrificed everything, and somehow managed to put all 5 of them through school. Now those children had families of their own scattered across the country, and Eleanor rarely saw them except for occasional holiday visits. But she wasn't completely alone. Her youngest grandson, Miguel, lived in Phoenix and checked on her regularly. Miguel was 24 years old and had been working his way up as a prospect in the local motorcycle club scene. Eleanor didn't fully understand her grandson's lifestyle, the leather, the motorcycles, the late nights, but she knew he was a good boy who loved his grandmother fiercely. What Eleanor didn't know was that she was about to encounter the kind of predators who specifically targeted elderly people, viewing them as easy marks who were unlikely to fight back or cause trouble. And what those predators didn't know was that this particular elderly woman had a grandson who would move heaven and earth to protect her. Lurking in the shadows near the gas station were 3 men in their early 20s who had been watching Eleanor since she pulled up to the pump. They had observed her careful counting of money, her old car, her nervous glances around the poorly lit station, and they had decided she would be their target for the evening. The leader of the group was Antonio "Tony" Rodriguez, a career criminal with a long history of targeting the elderly and vulnerable. Tony specialized in purse snatching and strong-arm robbery, and he particularly enjoyed the power trip that came from intimidating people who couldn't fight back. With Tony were his usual partners, Carlos Mendoza, a skinny drug addict who would do anything for his next fix, and Jerome Washington, a hulking man with a violent temper who enjoyed the physical aspect of their crimes. Eleanor finished pumping her gas and walked slowly toward the station to pay, her arthritic joints making each step careful and deliberate. She clutched her purse tightly against her body, a habit she had developed after decades of living in neighborhoods where such caution was necessary for survival. "Look at this," Tony whispered to his companions. "Easy money walking right toward us. She looks like she might have Social Security money on her," Carlos added, his eyes fixed on Eleanor's purse. "Probably keeps cash 'cause she don't trust banks." Jerome cracked his knuckles. "I say we take it all. Purse, jewelry, everything." They waited until Eleanor was walking back to her car, her transaction completed and her guard slightly lowered. The station attendant was busy with another customer, and there were no other vehicles at the pumps. It was the perfect opportunity for what they had planned. Tony stepped out of the shadows first, blocking Eleanor's path to her car. "Excuse me, abuela," he said in a mockingly polite voice. "Nice purse you got there." Eleanor looked up at him with the wariness of someone who had lived long enough to recognize danger when she saw it. "Thank you," she said quietly, trying to step around him. "I need to get to my car." Tony moved to block her again, his smile revealing gold teeth that glinted in the neon light. "Not so fast, Grandma. We need to have a little conversation first." Carlos and Jerome emerged from the shadows, effectively surrounding Eleanor and cutting off any escape route. The 3 men towered over the elderly woman, their presence radiating menace. "What do you want?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. She had survived the Great Depression, raised 5 children alone, and buried a husband. She was not easily intimidated, but she also wasn't foolish enough to think she could physically resist 3 young men. "We want what's in that purse," Jerome said bluntly. "Hand it over, and nobody gets hurt." Eleanor clutched her purse tighter. Inside was not just her money, but her medication, her identification, her late husband's wedding ring that she still carried everywhere, and the few family photos she kept with her always. "I don't have much," she said. "Just enough for groceries. Please, I need this money." Tony laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the empty gas station. "You need it? Lady, you look like you got 1 foot in the grave already. What do you need money for? Just give us the purse and go home to die in peace." The cruelty of the words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. To be reduced to nothing more than a burden waiting to die was devastating for a woman who had spent her entire life caring for others. "Please," she said again, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I worked all day for this money. I clean offices on my hands and knees. I earn every dollar." Carlos snatched at the purse, but Eleanor pulled it away, stumbling backward in the process. "Give it here, you old bat," Carlos snarled. "We're not playing games." Jerome stepped forward and shoved Eleanor hard, sending her stumbling backward into the side of her car. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and she gasped for breath as pain shot through her ribs. "Look at that," Tony said with amusement. "Grandma wants to be tough. Maybe we need to teach her some respect." He grabbed the purse and yanked it from Eleanor's hands with such force that she fell to her knees on the rough asphalt. The contents spilled everywhere. Her medication bottles rolling under cars, her precious photos scattered by the wind, her late husband's wedding ring disappearing into the darkness. Eleanor knelt there on the pavement, tears streaming down her face as she watched a lifetime's worth of memories and necessities scattered like trash. The humiliation was complete. "Look at her cry," Jerome laughed. "Old people are so pathetic. Maybe we should take her car keys too," Carlos suggested. "Somebody that old probably shouldn't be driving anyway." They began going through her purse, pulling out the small amount of cash she had earned and tossing aside everything else as worthless. To them, she was nothing more than an easy target, a source of quick money with no consideration for the impact of their actions. What they didn't know was that Eleanor always carried a small emergency phone that Miguel had given her, and in her fall, she had accidentally activated the emergency call feature. The phone had automatically dialed Miguel, and he was listening to everything that was happening. 25 miles away, Miguel Vasquez was in the garage of the motorcycle club, working on his bike with several other prospects and full members, when he heard his grandmother's voice crying and pleading, followed by the cruel laughter of her attackers. Something inside him snapped. Miguel had been trying to earn his way into the Phoenix chapter of the Hells Angels for 2 years. He understood the code, the loyalty, the brotherhood that defined the club. But more importantly, he understood that family was sacred, and anyone who hurt family was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. "Jesus, Miguel," said Tommy Road Dog Chen, who was working on his own bike nearby. "What's wrong, brother?" Miguel held up his phone so Tommy could hear the sounds of his grandmother being robbed and humiliated. "Someone's hurting my grandmother," Miguel said, his voice tight with rage. "Chevron Station on McDowell. I gotta go." Tommy listened for a few seconds, hearing Eleanor's cries and the attacker's laughter. His face hardened immediately. "Brother, you don't go anywhere alone. Not for this." Tommy immediately called out to the other club members in the garage. "Church, now! Miguel's grandmother is being attacked." The response was immediate and unanimous. Work stopped, tools were dropped, and leather vests were grabbed. Within minutes, a dozen Harleys were starting up, their engines roaring to life with mechanical fury. "Miguel," said Charles Savage Morrison, the chapter president, as he approached with his helmet. "You ride with me. Road Dog, Iron Horse, Bear, you follow. Everyone else, spread out and make sure these punks don't have any escape routes." The convoy of motorcycles roared out of the garage like avenging angels, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they raced toward the gas station. Miguel rode behind Savage, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear for his grandmother and anticipation for what was about to happen to her attackers. Back at the gas station, Tony, Carlos, and Jerome were taking their time humiliating Eleanor, making a game out of her suffering. They had found her small roll of cash, about $60, and were counting it slowly while she knelt on the pavement, still trying to gather her scattered belongings. $60, Tony announced. "Not bad for 5 minutes' work." "What about her jewelry?" Jerome asked, noticing the simple gold cross necklace Eleanor wore. "That might be worth something." He reached down and yanked the necklace from Eleanor's neck, breaking the chain and leaving a red mark on her throat. "Please," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "That was my mother's. It's all I have left of her." "Not anymore," Carlos laughed. "Now it's ours." They were so focused on their cruelty that they didn't notice the sound of motorcycle engines approaching until the bikes were already turning into the gas station parking lot. The first Harley appeared like a mechanical predator, its single headlight cutting through the darkness as it rumbled into the lot. Behind it came another, then another, until a dozen motorcycles were arranged in a perfect semicircle around the gas pumps. The sound of the engines was deafening, echoing off the buildings and pavement with mechanical fury. The bikers sat motionless on their machines for a moment, their faces hidden behind dark visors, looking like something out of a nightmare. Tony, Carlos, and Jerome stopped their assault on Eleanor and looked around nervously. They had heard stories about motorcycle clubs, about what happened to people who crossed them, but they had never expected to encounter them personally. "What the hell is this?" Carlos whispered. "Probably just some weekend warriors," Tony said, though his voice lacked conviction. "They won't do anything. Too many witnesses." That was when Miguel climbed off Savage's bike and removed his helmet. "Abuela," he called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Are you okay?" Eleanor looked up from where she knelt on the pavement, her face lighting up despite her tears. "Miguel, how did you—" "Your emergency phone called me," Miguel explained, walking toward her with purpose. "I heard everything." The three attackers suddenly realized that their easy victim had connections they hadn't anticipated. Miguel was young and lean, but there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he was not someone to be taken lightly. "Look, we were just asking the lady for directions," Tony said, trying to back away from the confrontation. "No big deal." Miguel looked at his grandmother kneeling on the pavement, her belongings scattered everywhere, her necklace broken, tears streaming down her face. "Directions?" Miguel said quietly. "Is that why she's on the ground crying? Is that why her purse is empty and her things are everywhere?" Savage and the other bikers had dismounted and were now walking toward the group, their boots echoing on the asphalt. These weren't weekend riders or posers playing dress-up. These were real outlaws, men who had earned their colors through loyalty, courage, and an unbreakable code that put family above everything else. "Son," Savage said to Tony, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. "You picked the wrong grandmother to mess with." Jerome, the largest of the three attackers, tried to maintain his bravado. "Yeah? What are you gonna do about it? This is a public place. You can't touch us." Bear, whose nickname accurately described both his size and temperament, stepped forward. "Boy," Bear said slowly, "you just robbed and assaulted a 73-year-old woman. You think anybody here gives a damn about your rights?" Tommy Road Dog approached Eleanor and gently helped her to her feet. "Ma'am?" he said respectfully. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Eleanor shook her head, though she was clearly shaken. Okay, just scared." "Well, you're safe now," Tommy assured her. "Nobody else is going to hurt you tonight." Iron Horse was gathering Eleanor's scattered belongings, carefully collecting her medication bottles and photographs. When he found her mother's broken necklace, his expression hardened. "They broke your necklace, ma'am?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, fresh tears starting to flow. Iron Horse walked over to Jerome and held out his hand. "Give me the necklace, now." Jerome looked around at the circle of bikers surrounding him and realized that resistance was futile. With shaking hands, he pulled the necklace from his pocket and handed it over. "And the money?" Savage added. "All of it." Tony reluctantly handed over the $60 they had stolen, along with Eleanor's purse. "Now," Miguel said, his voice tight with controlled rage, "you're going to apologize to my grandmother, and you're going to mean it." Carlos tried to brazen it out. We don't have to apologize for anything. We didn't do nothing wrong." That was when Diesel, the club sergeant-at-arms, stepped forward. Diesel was not a large man, but there was something about him that suggested he had seen and done things that most people couldn't imagine. "Son," Diesel said quietly, "you have two choices here. You can apologize like a man, or we can have a different kind of conversation. And trust me, you don't want that conversation." The three men looked around at the dozen bikers surrounding them, men who looked like they had stepped out of their worst nightmares. They were completely outnumbered and outmatched, trapped in a parking lot with no escape routes. One by one, they approached Eleanor. Their earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "Ma'am," Tony said, his voice shaking, "I'm sorry. What we did was wrong. There's no excuse for it." Carlos and Jerome followed suit, each offering their own trembling apologies to the woman they had terrorized just minutes before. Eleanor, showing the kind of grace that comes from a lifetime of hardship and wisdom, nodded her acceptance. "I forgive you," she said simply, "but I hope you learned something tonight." Savage pulled out his wallet and handed Miguel several $100s. "This is for your grandmother," he said, "for her medical expenses, for her pain and suffering, and to replace anything that was damaged. And there's something else," Bear added, approaching Tony with a business card. "You see this address? That's a senior center downtown. You three are going to volunteer there every Saturday for the next year. You're going to help elderly people with their groceries, their errands, whatever they need. And if we hear about you bothering any more innocent people," Iron Horse continued, "we'll have this conversation again. Except next time, it won't be in a public place where we have to mind our manners." The message was crystal clear. The three men nodded frantically, understanding that they had been given a second chance they were unlikely to get again. Miguel helped his grandmother into her car, making sure she was comfortable and safe. The other bikers surrounded the vehicle protectively as she started the engine. "Abuela," Miguel said through the car window, "I'm going to follow you home. Make sure you get there safely." Eleanor reached out and touched her grandson's face. "Miguel," she said, "I always knew you were a good boy. Tonight you proved you're also a good man." As Eleanor drove away with Miguel and several other bikers escorting her, the three attackers were left standing in the gas station parking lot, their humiliation complete and their lesson learned. Tony, Carlos, and Jerome did indeed show up at the senior center the following Saturday, where they began their year of volunteer service. Some say the experience changed them fundamentally, teaching them lessons about respect and compassion that their street life had failed to provide. Eleanor returned to her normal routine, but now she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew she was protected. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the community, and suddenly, Eleanor found herself with a reputation that preceded her wherever she went. Miguel earned his full colors the following month, officially becoming a member of the Phoenix chapter. His actions in protecting his grandmother had demonstrated the kind of loyalty and family values that the club respected above all else. The senior center where the three men volunteered saw a dramatic increase in donations and volunteer applications After word spread about what had happened, the community rallied around the idea of protecting their elderly residents, inspired by the example set by the motorcycle club. Because in the world of those who live by the code of brotherhood, family extends beyond blood relations. Respect for elders is non-negotiable, and justice sometimes arrives on a dozen motorcycles, ready to defend those who cannot defend themselves. The lesson was simple but powerful. Real strength protects the vulnerable, real courage stands up for what's right, and sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who show up when you need them most. And sometimes, the grandmother you think is helpless has a grandson who will move heaven and earth to keep her safe.